Welcome to Aha, a human among humans. I have one of my favorite humans here. This is Tim Ahern, who has written a book called 17 Improvisations on a book by James Joyce. So if you've been wanting to understand one of the great books of the 20th century, really the 21st too, Finnegans Wake, this is the book for you. And I am going to defend this book is an improvement over James Joyce's Finnegans Wake.
And I'm going to defend the original. It's a little worse for wear here.
Because he's loved it so. There was one great cartoonist, and he sent the man who wrote Where the Wild Things Are.
Oh, right.
And one of his readers, the mother sent him, "Thank you so much for Where the Wild Things Are." And the author wrote back a little postcard saying, "Thank you, I love hearing from my readers." And the mother wrote back, "My son loved your postcard so much, he ate it." And this shows in the book. Tim Ahern loves it so much.
I've been chewing on it
Yes,
for years.
Digesting it. We're going to get...
No cover, no back, no spine.
This is true love.
This is the second one, by the way. The first one is completely obliterated.
Boy, see, we're really revealing deep secrets. So we're going to read from the last chapter of Finnegans Wake. Why don't you just sum up Finnegans Wake for us? No, the whole book.
Sure. So, as you know, probably the easiest way to think about it is that it's a book about a dream or the subconscious of a particular man in a city of Dublin.
And he's called Here Comes Everybody.
Here Comes Everybody. Also,
that's us.
Short for it's shortened to HCE. He goes under many names, but that's a good good moniker.
Yep.
And he seems to be dreaming about some anxieties he's had that have in his dreams are conflated into these huge condemnations of him that even requires him to go to court, and people chase him through the streets and through the woods, and he ends up under a pile of rocks. And there's always this talk that he's going to come resurging again, like Finnegans going to wake again. Maybe Finnegan is also a stand-in for the freedom fighters of Ireland of the time, the 1920s, when this book was being written. And they
have risen again. They've finally got free from England.
Exactly, right. And Joyce had very mixed feelings about it all. And there's very mixed feelings in this book about every...
Mixed feelings about being free?
About being free, and what... this is just one example, that, Joyce was a bit of a pacifist, and he liked to pull himself away and just look at things analytically. He wouldn't jump into some patriotic endeavor.
Oh my!
That just wasn't his makeup. But that's just one aspect. So anyway, so he goes through these adventures with his family. There are chapters devoted to each member of his family. He has 2 sons. He has a daughter. He has a wife. They each their stories are told. They tell stories about him. The neighborhood tells stories about him. The town tells stories about HCE. There are brawls. There's a court case. There's a funeral. There's many, and it keeps repeating over and over and over again. So like in each page, you get a sense of everything I've just told you, if you know how to look. So what's really interesting thing about the book is that words start to stand for whole concepts, for whole narratives. And so when you see a word, even if it's misspelled, even if it's punned on, it sends you off into these different ways of interpretation.
There's one pun which sums up 20th century psychology in half a sentence. When we were young and easily Freudian.
Yes, right. So you're referring to Jung and Freud in a very playful way.
My mother used to tell me, they say that boys who do this, and the they was Freud. She might not have known.
Yeah, and Joyce, I think, was kind of fighting with Freud here, or competing with him, and Jung, because this is a book about the subconscious. You could easily take it that way. And he felt that they, and in fact, I think Jung was even seeing his daughter, because his daughter
Yes.
had emotional problems.
Yeah.
And Joyce was very dissatisfied with the depth of the analysis. And so I think this is a bit of a rejoinder on Joyce's part to show what he knows about the human condition and the mind. And Joyce was also very scientific. He had these really big interests in, for example, Darwin. We have a reading group, and there's somebody that's always pointing out the connections to Darwin. But that's just one example. He's very interested in the sequential nature of a person's experiences, and he's also very skeptical about how people
Make the connections.
Yeah. Retell the stories. And here it just goes entirely wild, where you sort of need a guide to the first time anybody looks into the wake. It's a bit of a
Here's
plot.
the best guide ever written. Tim Ahern, 17 Improvisations on a book by James Joyce.
So what I tried to do is there's a lot of analysis about Finnegans Wake out there. There's Campbell and Robinson.
It's an industry.
It's an industry.
Yes.
And I admire so many of them, even the ones that have passed, the ones that are still alive. It's still getting more and more deep and learned. But it's a bit of a slog. A lot of people don't like to sit down and read some kind of exegesis and then go back to Finnegans Wake and then go back to the exegesis and then go to the annotations. It's something for the scholarly to do. And I'll just give you an example. So there's one of the early chapters. It's supposed to be about, all the analysts will say, well, it concerns a trial, the trial of HCE. And then you open up the Wake and you say, really? Well, okay, maybe it mentions a courthouse there, and 15 lines down, oh yeah, someone's in chains, and then something, a bailiff. Maybe it's about a court case, but in the meantime, there's all this Wakean language going on. So then I took some of these things and I thought, well, let's really explore that. If it is about that particular chapter, if it's about a court case, let's write a story about a court case. And we'll use the language of the Wake, not the challenging grammar of the Wake, but we'll use the words, the motifs, and try to put it together in a way that somebody could really follow sentence, word by word, sentence by sentence.
Yes, so I read this before I read the Wake now. Cheating. Wake's too hard.
And the other thing is, I called it an improvisation because I think of it as sort of the way jazz improvisations work. So if you hear My Favorite Things by Coltrane, you'll instantly recognize Raindrops and Roses, Whiskers on Kittens, and then it will diverge. And it doesn't diverge entirely. You can listen to the entire thing thinking, oh yes, the motifs are still there, maybe the chords are still there. No, he's modulated into something else. No, he's coming back. He's going into it and exploring My Favorite Things in his improvisation. And that's what I tried to do here. I tried to keep it true to the Wake, but I didn't feel bound to the Wake, except that page by page, I'm processing the Wake. And hopefully, when people read it, they'll feel that they're getting a little closer interpretation of the Wake, a little better understanding.
I take it as a translation. So, but you'll see when we...
The first English translation of Finnegans Wake.
Yes, so people have done that with Kant. Kant has been translated into German.
I can understand that.
So this is being translated into English. I just realized when Tim is talking that in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, which is somewhat of an autobiography by Joyce of when he's growing up, he ends it, I think he's standing by the seashore, there's seagulls around, He's just seen a beautiful woman, or young woman. And he says, I'm going to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. Right, that's the very end. Did I get the scene right? Or
I think so, yeah.
And I wondered why, since in this book, conscience, there's so many horrible things going on. And now I realize there is conscience because he's giving himself such a hard time. He knows, I don't know what, he's helped me enjoy the hard time I give myself. For example, there's the character named Shem, which in Hebrew means name or even God in Hebrew. When Jews didn't want to say, blessed be God, because you don't want to use the name, they say, Baruch Hashem, blessed be the name.
Just
Yes.
referring to it.
Yes, the name is blessed. Let's not get too close to it. And Shem says, I've always remembered this, putting himself down. I'm the worst human being of all. Nothing could be more disgusting than this. I prefer canned salmon to the real thing. And that has helped me when I'm telling myself, as not you, dear audience, but many of the rest of us, telling myself how bad I am. I even have a song, called my first song I ever wrote, How Bad Can I Be If You Love Me? But this is, in fact, that song was in some ways inspired by that. If you can have a good time putting yourself down, we're home.
Well, you mentioned the character Shem. He's the artist in Finnegans Wake. You could say he's the stand-in for Joyce. And he probably gets the worst treatment aside from the father.
Yeah.
I mean, Shem is just this shameful...
It almost sounds like
a sham. He's a sham.
He's a sham, yes.
It's dreadful. And in this entire chapter, he just tears Shem apart. Some people say Joyce protests too much, that he's... It's sort of like a fake modesty or something like that. But he's brutal.
I'm sure he's brutal on himself.
I think he is, yeah.
He's brutal on most people. So, well, with that as an introduction, I think that's... Oh no, I want to tell you, I talked to you before. Let me share my story.
Sure.
So when I went to the University of Chicago, where we lived the life of the mind.
How is it up there?
It is... Everyone had to be neurotic and unhappy. They wouldn't let you in. No, they wouldn't let you in. They'd look at your past and say, happy family, love my father and mother and their personal life. Say, no way. Oh, I felt like killing my father and my mother hit me until I was 14 and it hurt her hands because my bones were too hard. Yes, we want you. So we didn't ask each other, how are you when we met each other on campus? If I met you on campus, I'd say, Tim, what have you been thinking today? And if it wasn't deep enough, I didn't want to be your friend. We talked about women. Oh, maybe this was like the way. We didn't say she's beautiful or pretty or talking about, her figure. We really said this. We said, wow, Judy's ontologically dense. We really said that, appreciating.
I can't think of a finer compliment.
Of a woman. You should try that. See what your wife says. Molly, you were the most ontologically dense. So I had to go to Israel for 3 years to try to get out of my mind by working on the kibbutz. And one day I was successful grinding chicken manure into a chicken coop. I helped build chicken coops on the kibbutz, a religious kibbutz. And for 8 hours, the machine, it was very nice. None of this, none of to think of what, we're talking about here. Just and I'm covered with manure from head to foot, and I finished my 8-hour stint. Still early in the afternoon. We get up at 4, and I see a rabbi, and he says, how are you? And I feel for the first time in my life, I wish I could keep this, maybe telling the story, that I don't have to say anything interesting. I try to say interesting things for you, dear audience. Columbia's watching, and others. But I didn't have to. I was a valuable human being because I was covered with shit. It was just, I have to remember this. And Joyce helps with that. Joyce helps me remember. And so I think when he says, I want to help forge the uncreated conscience of my race, means it wasn't created yet. Joyce's conscience, in some ways, even giving himself a hard time, is doing it with fun. His name, Joyce, Rejoice. He's rejoicing on what a disgusting human being he is.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up manure because the Shem character is a writer, but since it's Finnegans Wake, it's in the subconscious in the nighttime. He has nothing to write on except his own body, and he has to make his own ink, and he makes his ink from his own excrement.
Wow!
And then he writes. You could even say he's writing Finnegans Wake on his skin.
Oh,
the parchment of his
like my
skin.
story.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Me and Joyce were tight.
Like that.
Well, with that as an introduction, I had one more thing to say, but we have another half hour after this. But I felt that I needed to understand this book in order to live, and we're discovering why. I studied many religions, and if I can learn to play with them, if we can play with divinity.
Yeah, and religion plays a huge part in Finnegans Wake. There's constant references to, all of the religions of the world, and somehow the relationship with God has been maybe broken or certainly challenged in Finnegans Wake, and so it's central to the texture of the wake, and you'll find the names of gods from India and small little tribes and cultures. Everything is in there.
And there's 111 of, I think, 116 surahs in the Koran are in here.
They're all mentioned, yes. And what else was I going to say? I read a really interesting article about the wake. It said that there's a lot of obscure heretics mentioned in the wake, and they pointed out that almost every book, so there's lots of references to other literature, most of it was banned at one time or another. And so it's almost a celebration of everything that's been banned in the world.
Including Huckleberry Finn, which has Finn in it. Huckleberry Finn was banned in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I called Mayor Walsh and asked him personally to ban this book. I think it'll give you very good press.
There's no bad press.
Okay, with that as our introduction, what we're going to begin, I think, Tim, we're going to begin with the last chapter, because in some ways this is hope for the world. I mean, Joyce has famously said, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. And this chapter, the last chapter of Finnegans Wake, is literally waking from the dream, which was in many ways a nightmare.
Right, so there's been like 16 chapters exploring the subconscious, the dream world, the night world, and now we're getting glimmers of light. And it's interesting because once the light seems to hit each character in turn, they disappear. And so it's arguable that they're leaving the wake with the first light of dawn. It's really a fantastic chapter. And it starts off with a little chant. Shall we go there?
Yes.
So shall I read the wake?
Yes, why don't you read the wake, and then I'm going to read the improvement on the wake. And you can decide, you can vote in, just write CCTV, whether Tim Ahern or James Joyce has done a better job with getting up in the morning.
Send in those postcards.
Mm-hmm.
So we won't read a lot here. I'll just read a paragraph or so, and then you'll read the same in the improvisation. Sandias, 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 calling all downs, calling all downs to Dane. Array, surrection. Wicker to the whole bluden world. O rally, O rally, O rally, Flintsty, O rally. To what lifelike tine of the bird can be? Seek you so many matters. Haze sea east to Oceania. Here, here, tas, pat, staff, wof, half, bloof, rooter. The smog is lofting, and already the old man has gotten up on other times to litanate the Bonamores.
The smog is lofting. Isn't that beautiful? Why is that so beautiful instead of the smog is lifting? The smog is, it's like, loft is asleep too. Right? You sleep in a loft.
Yes, right.
The smog is, it's so beautiful. I'm not sure I can even explain it. But I think I would get up better in the morning.
If you were lofting?
Yes, if I was lofting, because it's like lifting, yes? But loft is like, may we keep our dream-like fun during the day?
Well, you definitely should try.
Okay, so here's the improvement. He was modest. He called it, well, it's called 17 Improvisations. But Tim, when he thought none of you were listening, confessed to me that improvisation has the word improve in it.
I don't recall saying that.
Aha! We're gonna have to trial. He didn't know we had recorded in the green room. There was a recording going on. Joyce was competing even with the Koran. That's why he wanted to be better than them.
Yes, that's one example.
Yes, I mean the Quran is read by 1 billion Muslims.
And that was a night dream
Daily.
too, right? It was Muhammad was traveling on his horse and this horse took him to Israel, to Jerusalem, I believe.
Yes.
You probably know it better than I do.
That's part of it. Yes,
That's
one
part
of the
of
surahs.
it. Yeah, one of the surahs.
And I'm so tempted. You're going to have to stay with us for the next show because I want to respond to that. Maybe it's connected to the wake, who knows. So Muhammad is being housed in the home of the woman he proposed to when he was 18 years old, who he loved, but he was an orphan. So her family didn't let her marry him.
Oh, because he was like a lower caste
Yes.
character.
And then he has this dream, or maybe people think more than a dream. Muslims do. He has an experience riding on his horse to Jerusalem.
Through the air, right?
Yep. And going to 7 heavens. It's really like the wake. And talks to God. And God says, I want your people to pray 50 times a day to really get into the spirit of this new divine world we can live in. And Muhammad, on his way down, meets Moses, and Moses says, go back and negotiate with him. 50's way too many. And they negotiate to 45 and 40, and finally God says, okay, 5 times a day. And he comes back, and then on his horse, comes back to the home of the woman he was in love with when he was 18. So, and Joyce is competing with. Joyce wants to write something just because 1 billion Muslims read the Quran every year. He wants, with Tim's help, to spread out to more than 1 billion. This is the improved version. The Earth's bulk rolls away, about to expose the Western Islands to the prime source of energy allotted them. The sun's call to the souls on the highlands is returned with chanting and prayers as the first risers rouse. A new week for the whole bloody world. Some humming a favorite ditty. I'd like it to be just the beginning again of the wake, and then people can compare.
Okay. Sandias, Sandias, Sandias. So there's that the mystical call to prayer. Calling all downs to Dane. Array, the sun. Surrection, resurrection, insurrection. Ire weaker to the wold bluden world. O'Reilly, 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 Flengsty, O'Reilly. So there's your ditty that somebody might be singing. To what lifelike tine of the bird can be?
Well, I didn't understand that last, just that last, we have 1 minute. What's the last one? To what lifetime?
I think I may have skipped over that.
Yes, aha! He knows what to leave out. It is brilliant. What does that mean?
There'll be a sequel. And
Explain it to us.
I'll have all the little bits that I left out.
Okay, so for this first half hour, what last words can we leave our viewers with?
O'Reilly.
O'Reilly! Hooray! Hooray! Insurrection! Hazy in the East. Okay, thank you for joining us. We will be back. Stay awake for us. And it's
Three
called
minutes?
Awake because it's not only awake when someone dies, but we can all wake even after we feel like we're dead. Happiness for all of us. See you in 3 minutes. Hooray! Hooray!
Hooray!
Hooray! Insurrection!